You know, the more I've travelled, the more absurd the suggestion that this is the greatest country on earth, as so many Australians feel obliged to keep telling themselves. Great? Definitely. Greatest? No. Mainly because there's no such thing as the greatest country on earth. Like every other country, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong.
Last time we were in the World Cup was 1974. So it's a long haul, and at last, the Holy Grail was out there, and we could at least smell it if we couldn't touch it.
The day before, we weren't sure who was going to start and whatever. Then I found out that I was going to be on the bench. After the training session, I stayed behind with Lucas Neill and practiced 5 penalties.
I think people realised that this was us on the biggest sporting stage possible.
We all huddled up in a group, and he asked who was confident in taking the penalty, and I put up my hand straight away and said, yeah, I'd love to take one.
When Aloisi walked up to take that kick, I thought, I'm glad it's not me.
I could feel it, but it was sort of the buzz around me. There was this massive roar.
The emotion, you could have cut it with a knife.
You know, it can be a long walk from the halfway line to the penalty spot, but this one was probably the best walks of my life.
It mightn't be a big deal, but one particular penalty shot was a big deal, a very big deal, especially for the Australian football family. The penalty kick is a pretty simple thing. Of course, it takes technique and temperament, but basically, it's a set-piece free kick from a measly 12 metres. That kick meant the world. It put Australia on the big stage, and not just the football stage. For mine, football's bigger than a game. It's a global human phenomenon.
People always ask me why I go on about soccer, about football, and I guess it's because, for me, it's miles more than a sport. I mean, seen it the way I've seen it all over the world. It's a universal phenomenon, not a game, not a sport. So that makes it pretty important when out of 6 billion people in the globe, you know, well over half of them, probably close to 3/4 of them, are passionate about the sport. Actually, wherever I go in the world, there are 2 things I know I'm going to see: football and Coca-Cola. Well, it's a universal talking point. It matters everywhere. And that's why in that moment when John Aloisi put away that penalty against Uruguay, we sort of joined the world.
That moment has changed the game forever here. It has made Australia as a footballing nation grow, and it's never going to be the same again.
That said, when I was a kid growing up in suburban Brisbane, football was bagged, really bagged, quite derogatively as wogball. The reason I got involved was quite mundane, actually. It wasn't hero worship or even a divine piece of skill by yours truly. Our nearest neighbours and friends were soccer nuts who ran the local Taringa Rovers club, and I more or less got involved because of them.
My dad died when I was 4, so the Spear family were almost foster parents. I was just taken on board. I was almost an extra member of their family. I used to sit on the floor, by the way, with Jack Spear, the patron of the family, who was a sports journalist. That was I didn't realise it then, it was my introduction to journalism. And I used to bang away on an old, clapped out Olivetti, pretending I was him, writing stories about football.
In 1949, my father, Jack Spear, and his mate Ernie Dixon, under pressure from sons John and Trevor, decided that the boys in the district needed something worthwhile to do over a weekend, so they decided to form a soccer club. So in 1949, the Taringa Rovers Soccer Football Club was formed.
The Taringa Rovers was my first football team, and stayed my football team until almost I stopped playing, in a way.
It was a bit interesting because you weren't greeted with too much applause during those days. People used to look at you and say, soccer? What's going on here? Because it was generally thought to be something of an ethnic game in the 1940s. Strangely enough, all the lads that I can recall that played in that first team were all born and bred Australians. Most of them would never have kicked a soccer ball before in their life.
When I wasn't at school and being a good little boy and doing my homework, and playing sport was a good way to keep out of trouble. Don't ask me why, but you always had to have a lace-up on football shirts in those days. And white shorts, and blue and white socks, and boots that I polished furiously every Saturday morning. If you went out in the field with dirty boots on, you weren't a real footballer. And then the drinker overs had a big TR on the chest. And I actually designed the logo. Don't ask me why.
Well, I can tell you, George, that 60 years later, there's 500 juniors, 150 seniors that are still very proud to wear that club badge.
Yeah, undoubtedly encouraged by the Spear family. I nominated for the Queensland Ball Control Championship. Don't read anything to that. It had nothing to do with anything except football.
The competition consisted of 7 or 8 different disciplines: dribbling, shooting a goal, etc. One of the disciplines was juggling the ball on your feet and keeping it off the ground. But George thought this through and decided that whereas most of the disciplines everyone would probably get the same mark, if he could master the art of juggling a ball on his foot, he could probably win this.
So I taught myself to juggle largely, and I won the thing.
Some of the young fellas were getting 25 and 30 points, keeping the air and 30 points. George got over 250.
But something that I started almost for the hell of it developed into a passion I've had all my life. Forgive the immodesty, but I turned out actually to be a half-decent player. I got selected in I think, Brisbane under-14, Brisbane under-16, which are the underage representative sides, and that was quite a buzz, to wear the shirt of the city.
I had a pro offer while I was still at high school, and that really frightened the living daylights out of the family. In those days, football was not the most obvious way to make a living, let alone a good one. So when I discovered journalism and politics, I moved on to a very, very different kind of world.
Boy, life would have been different had my parents said yes and not no. I may not have invaded people's living rooms all over the country as a television journalist had I taken up the professional football offer. I look at football that's played these days and I wouldn't get a kick in the A-League. I wouldn't get a kick anywhere else, I don't think, except in the rear end by the coach.